Emma had always looked up to her older sister, Claire. Growing up, Claire was the one everyone admired. Beautiful, confident, and effortlessly graceful. Emma, on the other hand, had always felt a little out of place. She was never as slender or as stylish as Claire, and she often found herself hiding behind the shadows of her sister's spotlight. But despite these differences, Emma and Claire shared a close bond. At least she thought they did. So, when Emma received the wedding invitation, her heart swelled with excitement. Claire had asked her to be one of her bridesmaids, or so she thought. When they met up to discuss the wedding details, Claire dropped a bombshell. "Emma, I need to talk to you about something," Claire said, her tone tentative. Emma was sitting in the cafe, her eyes wide in anticipation, but as Claire spoke, her world began to tilt. "I just want to be honest with you," Claire continued, biting her lip nervously. "You know how much I love you, right? I don't think you quite fit the aesthetic I'm going for in the bridal party. It's nothing personal, it's just that, well, the other bridesmaids have a certain look, and I think it's better if you're not in the party this time." The words cut deep. Emma stared at Claire, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment and hurt. It felt as though the ground had fallen out from beneath her. Her sister, the person she admired most, had just told her that she wasn't good enough to stand beside her on her special day. "Are you serious?" Emma finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and pain. "I'm sorry, Emma. I just want everything to be perfect," Claire said, her voice softening. "I'm sure you'll understand." But Emma didn't understand. How could she? She had always been there for Claire, supported her through everything. And now, it felt like Claire was telling her she didn't measure up, that she wasn't beautiful enough, or stylish enough, or aesthetic enough. As Emma walked away from that conversation, the hurt lingered like a weight on her chest. She tried to push the sadness aside, telling herself it wasn't a big deal. But deep down it felt like a betrayal. For the first time in years, Emma questioned her worth. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe she wasn't the type of person who deserved to be part of her sister's big day. Days passed, but the sting of Claire's words remained. Emma couldn't shake the feeling of rejection, and it gnawed at her every time she thought about the wedding. It wasn't just the pain of not being included. It was the realization that, for years, she had let herself be defined by others' opinions of her. The idea that she wasn't aesthetic enough felt like an echo of every insecurity she had hidden beneath the surface. But then, something shifted within Emma. She refused to let her sister's judgment dictate her sense of self. If Claire couldn't see her worth, Emma would show her, and herself, that she was more than just someone who lived in her sister's shadow. Emma decided it was time for a change. But this time, it wasn't about trying to conform to some ideal that didn't belong to her. It was about reclaiming her confidence, rediscovering who she was, and loving herself no matter what. The first step was physical. She signed up for a fitness routine. Emma had never been someone who particularly enjoyed working out, but this time, she approached it differently. She wasn't doing it to fit into a mold, to match someone else's idea of beauty, but to feel stronger, healthier, and more empowered in her own skin. She started with simple exercises. Yoga in the mornings, long walks in the evenings, and gradually, she built a routine that made her feel like she was accomplishing something for herself. Next came skincare. Emma had never paid much attention to her skin before, but she started researching products and routines that suited her skin type. She took her time, learning about self-care, and slowly, her skin began to glow with newfound health. But the changes weren't just physical. Emma realized that her emotional well-being needed as much attention as her body. For years, she had been caught up in comparisons, comparing herself to Claire, to other bridesmaids, to everyone who seemed to have it together. She often felt like she wasn't enough, like she had to fit into some mold to be seen and valued. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media, Emma came across a quote that resonated deeply. "The most beautiful thing you can be is yourself." It was like a light bulb went off in her head. She didn't have to change who she was to be worthy of love and respect. She was worthy as she was. That day, Emma sat down with a journal and started writing. She poured her thoughts onto the pages, Her feelings of hurt, her aspirations, her dreams, and her desires to embrace her true self. She wrote about how she had always tried to be someone else's idea of enough, and how tired she was of trying to please others. She also made a pact with herself. She wouldn't seek approval anymore. Not from Claire, not from anyone. She would make decisions based on what she wanted, not what others expected of her. And if she was going to prove something, it wasn't to anyone else. It was to herself. Emma's self-reflection became a turning point. She wasn't trying to be someone else anymore. She was becoming the woman she always wanted to be. Strong, confident, and unapologetically herself. And soon, the results of her hard work started to show. She didn't need to fit into Claire's vision of a perfect bridesmaid. She was enough just the way she was. As the wedding day loomed closer, Emma's transformation was undeniable. Physically, she was in the best shape of her life, but more than that, she was radiating confidence. Her skin glowed from the care she'd invested in it, her posture was taller, and her smile felt more genuine. She had grown into someone who was comfortable in her own skin, and for the first time, Emma didn't feel the weight of needing validation from anyone, least of all her sister. Despite this newfound confidence, Emma hadn't forgotten the sting of the conversation with Claire. The hurt still lingered, but it was no longer something that defined her. She had worked hard to find peace within herself, and that was what mattered most. She wasn't going to let the rejection dictate her actions any longer. The wedding rehearsal arrived, and as Emma walked into the venue, her family was there, preparing for the big day. Everyone turned to look at her when she entered, their eyes wide with surprise. Claire stood off to the side, nervously checking her phone, but as Emma approached, her eyes widened even further. "Emma," Claire said, her voice shaky as she took in her sister's appearance. You look amazing. I didn't expect this." Her family couldn't help but notice how different Emma looked, not just physically, but in the way she carried herself. Gone was the shy, insecure girl who constantly compared herself to Claire. In her place stood someone unashamed of who they were. After the rehearsal, the family gathered for a casual dinner, and Emma joined them, feeling more at ease than ever. She was no longer looking for approval from anyone, and it felt liberating. Her mother, who had always been a little more critical of Emma's choices, took a moment to pull her aside. "Emma," her mother said softly, "I know this wedding has been hard for you, and I can see how much you've changed. You're so much more confident. I'm proud of you." Emma felt a lump in her throat as her mother's words sank in. She had never been one to seek praise, but hearing her mother acknowledge her growth felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She smiled, giving her mom a tight hug. "I'm proud of me too," Emma whispered, surprising herself with how true the words felt. The evening was filled with small, meaningful conversations. Emma and Claire hadn't yet had the chance to talk alone, but Emma could sense her sister's curiosity. Her quiet acknowledgement that something had changed in the dynamic between them. Claire had noticed the shift, but she hadn't yet fully processed it. Later that night, as the family dispersed, Emma stayed behind to help with some last-minute details for the wedding. Claire found her, standing by the decorations, adjusting a floral arrangement. "Hey," Claire said, her voice softer now, the tension of their earlier conversations hanging in the air. "I need to apologize." Emma turned to face her. Claire took a deep breath before continuing. "I was wrong. I've been so focused on this perfect wedding, the perfect look, that I didn't realize how hurtful I was being. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. You are beautiful inside and out. I should have never made you feel otherwise." Emma felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She hadn't expected an apology, let alone one so sincere. Claire had always been the one to set the tone in their relationship, and now Emma realized that their dynamic was finally shifting. "I appreciate you saying that, Claire," Emma said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "It means a lot to me. But I've learned something over the past few weeks. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Not to you, not to anyone. I'm enough just the way I am." Claire nodded, her eyes softening. "I can see that now. I'm so proud of you, Emma. You've really grown into someone I admire." The two sisters shared a quiet moment of understanding, a silent bond forming between them. Emma no longer felt like she was living in the shadow of her sister's expectations. She had learned to embrace her own light. And as the rehearsal dinner came to a close, Emma left with a heart full of quiet satisfaction. She had proven to herself that she didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. She was enough just as she was. The wedding was just around the corner, and Emma felt ready for whatever came next. The wedding day arrived, and the venue was nothing short of breathtaking. The air was filled with excitement as the bridal party prepared for the ceremony. Claire, stunning in her wedding gown, was surrounded by her bridesmaids, each one fitting her ideal aesthetic, slender, polished, and flawless. But despite the picture-perfect bridesmaids and the dreamlike setting, Claire couldn't help but notice something was missing. She glanced around the room, her mind racing. The photos were going to look beautiful, but there was something about the energy, the spirit of the day that felt incomplete. She had made sure everything was perfect, every detail meticulously planned, but when she looked at her bridesmaids, something felt off. Then her gaze landed on Emma, who was sitting off to the side, quietly chatting with their mom. Emma looked radiant, her dress a simple yet elegant choice that highlighted her newfound confidence. She wasn't trying to fit into anyone's mold. She was herself, and that authenticity shone brighter than anything Claire had anticipated. "Emma," Claire said suddenly, walking over to her sister. "I need to ask you something." Emma looked up, her expression calm, but she could tell by the look in Claire's eyes that something had shifted. "I know you're not part of the bridal party, and I never meant to make you feel excluded," Claire began, her voice softening. "But the photos, they just won't be the same without you. Would you mind stepping in for one picture? Just one. For me." Emma paused. She had spent so much time healing, finding her own worth. Being asked to step in wasn't about seeking validation anymore. It was about the bond between sisters. She smiled, the same quiet confidence radiating from her as she stood up. "I'd be honored, Claire," Emma said, her voice steady. "But this time I'm doing it for me too." The photographer, sensing the change in energy, quickly repositioned the bridal party. The other bridesmaids, still in their matching dresses, exchanged surprised glances but said nothing. Claire stood by Emma's side, her face a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a touch of regret for the way things had unfolded. As the photographer snapped photos, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't about trying to fit into anyone else's expectations. She wasn't just stepping in for a picture. She was reclaiming her place, not only in her sister's wedding but in her own life. The woman who once felt inadequate now stood beside her sister, not as someone who had to change to be part of the moment, but as someone who belonged exactly as she was. After the photos were done, Claire pulled Emma aside again, her voice filled with sincerity. "Emma, I didn't realize how much I took you for granted. You've always been there for me, and I'm sorry for not seeing you as the amazing person you are. I know this wedding was important to me, but I should have made sure you felt valued too." Emma smiled softly, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "It's okay, Claire. I've learned a lot these past few weeks. I've learned that my worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval. Not yours, not anyone's. But I'm glad we're having this conversation now." Claire nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Emma. You've taught me a lot today." As the ceremony began, Emma stood in the back, watching as Claire walked down the aisle with their father. There was a moment of realization. Her sister had finally seen her, not as someone she had to change, but as someone who was already perfect in her own way. And while Emma wasn't officially part of the bridal party, she had found her place in that moment, right where she belonged. It wasn't in the formal role of bridesmaid, but in the deeper, more authentic connection she had with her sister, one rooted in love and understanding. The unexpected twist wasn't just in the request to step in for the photos. It was in the quiet transformation of their relationship. Emma had found the strength to stand up for herself, and in doing so, had reminded Claire of the value of looking beyond the surface and seeing the heart of the person she loved most. As the wedding continued, Emma couldn't help but smile. This wasn't the perfect day everyone had envisioned, but it was the perfect one for her. A day of self-discovery, reconciliation, and finally, belonging. The wedding was over, and the guests had all gone home, but Emma's journey wasn't complete. The morning after the ceremony, Emma stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself with new eyes. She wasn't just the girl who had been excluded from her sister's wedding party anymore. She was a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her worth. As she touched up her makeup, Emma reflected on everything that had led her to this moment. The hurt, the rejection, the pain. It had all been necessary steps for her to realize something far more important. She had been spending so much of her life chasing approval, hoping to be seen as enough, when all along, the only approval she truly needed was her own. A knock on the door pulled Emma from her thoughts. She opened it to find Claire standing there, looking nervous but determined. Her wedding dress was now carefully packed away, but the energy of the day still lingered in the air. "Hey, do you have a minute?" Claire asked softly. "I really want to talk." "Of course," Emma replied, stepping aside to let Claire in. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About how I treated you leading up to the wedding," Claire said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I was so focused on creating the perfect picture, I completely overlooked how you might feel. And I'm ashamed of that." Emma sat across from her sister, her expression calm, but inside she felt a sense of peace. This wasn't just about an apology, it was about Claire's growth too. The woman who had once made Emma feel like she wasn't good enough was now admitting her mistakes, not because she was told to, but because she genuinely understood the impact of her actions. "I didn't handle things well, Emma," Claire continued. "But last night when I saw you in those photos, something hit me. You weren't just standing there looking beautiful, you were standing there as you. And it was more than enough." Emma felt her heart swell, but she didn't interrupt. Claire wasn't just apologizing. She was acknowledging Emma's journey, her transformation, and her strength. "I'm so sorry for what I said to you," Claire added. "But I also want you to know something. I've always admired you, even if I didn't always show it. You've always been there for me, and I think I took that for granted. I want to do better. I want to be a better sister to you." The weight that had lingered between them began to lift as Emma processed Claire's words. She had been waiting for this moment, not for validation, but for true understanding to pass between them. And it had finally come. "You don't have to apologize anymore," Emma said, her voice steady. "I've realized that I don't need your approval to feel valued. But what I do need is for us to be real with each other. And I'm glad we're finally having this conversation." Claire's eyes softened as she nodded. "You're right. This whole experience has made me see things differently. You've always been enough, Emma. And I've always loved you." The room fell silent for a moment, the air thick with the weight of their words. Emma felt a sense of healing wash over her, not because of her appearance or the validation she had sought, but because her relationship with her sister had truly shifted. Claire stood and walked over to Emma, extending her arms for a hug. Emma hesitated for just a moment before wrapping her arms around her sister, feeling the warmth of their bond reconnecting. "I'm proud of you, Emma," Claire whispered. "And I always will be." "I'm proud of me too," Emma whispered back, her voice filled with gratitude. "I've finally learned to be proud of who I am, no matter what." As they pulled away, Emma realized that the wedding was more than just a day of celebration. It was the catalyst for their growth, individually and as sisters. They had come full circle, moving from hurt to healing, from distance to understanding. Emma knew that life would continue to challenge her, but she also knew she was stronger than ever. She had found herself in the process, and in doing so, had found a deeper, more authentic connection with Claire. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. As Emma looked out the window, she felt a sense of peace that she had never experienced before. She was ready for whatever came next, because she had finally discovered that the most important thing was not how others saw her, but how she saw herself. And for the first time, Emma knew she was enough.